All financial support for this podcast comes from my patrons on patreon.com. If you'd like to join in with patrons, please check out patreon.com/DarwinGrosse. That's DarwinGrosse. Now enjoy the podcast. Okay, today I am actually in an office, M212 in the White Center in Carleton College in Northfield, meeting with a friend. I'm lucky enough to be able to say he's a friend, but also a master composer, performer, teacher. His name is Andrea Mazzariello. He gave me the thumbs up on that pronunciation, even though it felt like a train wreck. I think we got it. Who has got an interesting background. His background really aligns with the number of people that we've talked to already, and so that's cool. We can delve into some details. But also he's got some pretty unique personal practices that I'm interested in diving into. So with no more ordeal, let's talk to Andrea. Hey man, how's it going?
Hey Darwin, thanks for coming in and wanting to do this. It means a lot to be able to. I've listened to your podcast a bunch, and so being a part of it is sort of second only to being on Fresh Air with Terry Gross.
Yeah, it's the Gross family getting out there and doing
Totally. I didn't even think of that. I'm so slow.
But anyway, thanks for doing this. I'm actually really excited to be able to do it. But what kind of prompted me to do this is next week, for the listeners, it will have just occurred. But for me, it's next week you're going to be doing a performance that's sort of like in celebration of a new release you're doing, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a new record that I recorded over the summer with a wonderful collaborator and friend named Jason Truding, who plays drum set. Usually I do the drum set duties, but I turn them over to a true master drum set player. Made a bunch of beats, made a bunch of songs. He played with me, and we're releasing this record at Little Joy in Northfield on Friday. I'm going to be playing by myself, though. And so to sort of emulate the kind of flexibility and interesting work that Jason was doing behind the drum kit, I made a little program that takes the break beats on which the songs are based and sort of shuffles them around in sort of in a mischievous way. And so that'll hopefully be pretty interesting. It makes it harder to play with, but more interesting to listen to, I think. And so that's what I'll be doing on next Friday, the 28th, which is in the past for anyone listening.
Well, it's kind of actually really interesting, though, to hear that you're throwing that risk factor into it just apparently for fun, right?
Well, for fun and for a sort of suspicion about playing with a track that just cycles on and on. Mm-hmm. You know, I like it. I've done it that way. You saw me do that at my house, right? It was just a bunch of breakbeats in Ableton that I played over. And when Jason joined up and offered that kind of like sensitivity, flexibility, timbral, and musical change, that was exciting for me. And I thought, well, I've got the drum machine output from our record. What if I just slice up every hit, put it in Max, and have Max kind of decide when it's going to play the breakbeat and when it's going to play something else moment to moment, and sort of change the playback rate of the sounds and just really think about what's the architecture of a rhythmic pattern, what's important, and what can I kind of like slot in and out, kind of, you know, randomly, whimsically to make something new and interesting. But yeah, it is a risk factor. You know, I'm practicing a lot lately, and it's like a couple of these patterns are really tricky, and it'd be a lot easier to have a canned beat, you know?
Yeah, right. But I think I've talked about this with other people too. There's this sense that if you as the performer are feeling like there's a risk factor in play, it actually translates into kind of a vitality for that the listeners, that the audience picks up on, right?
Oh, that's 100% right, man. And it's like, and some of the tools in the set too make it even more risky. Like I made a vocal processor that reads pitch and amplitude and changes that to a delay time. So the higher I sing and the louder I sing, the longer the delay. But it's finicky, you know. I don't know when it's going to work and not. I mean, but it's really fun to be in that environment. And like you say, people sense that you're being vigilant in your performance, right, and that makes them vigilant as listeners.
Yeah. Well, now I had an opportunity to hear you perform in a couple of different scenarios. The first time was actually in a setting where, quite frankly, I'd never seen anybody actually try and do this kind of thing. It was almost, it was almost like a throwback to like traditionalist one-man band style stuff, where it was a kit plus some keyboards and you singing, and you were actually using like bass amps and stuff like that to really sort of give almost the spatial sense of a band as well as the instrumentation of a band. What is it about doing like solo performance that, I mean, is it just that you don't get along very well with other people? or what drives you to try and do this stuff solo?
That's funny. It's not so unrelated to that interpersonal thing you said kind of as a joke. It's not that I don't get along with other people. It's that I feel really insecure as a musician, or have felt really insecure as a musician for a long time. So I'm happy to go in the basement and practice for a really long time. But being in the room with somebody else and they're like, hey, can you play a blah? And I'm like, I don't know what that is. That's not going to go as well for me emotionally as a human. So I think the initial motivation for going into that one-person band arsenal was just, don't look at me as a musician who can do anything in the moment. This is a rehearsed routine. It's almost choreography. I can get behind that. But if you're going to ask me to improvise or play off or whatever, I start feeling really bad about myself. So that was the reason I started doing this one-person band performance practice. And in fact, after the thing you saw, it got even more intense, where I had keyboards on either side and drumsticks in my hands while I was playing the keyboards. And so I was just like flipping sticks around. And this new stuff really clarifies that. It really doesn't, it's not so hung up about me having to do everything and do this kind of impossible physical activity. I'm just playing keyboards and there are some beats spitting around and I'm trying to sing, and it's so for me, this is about courage and about clarity. And I'm actually very proud that I've sort of let go of this one person obligation, and collaborating with Jason this summer was another great example of just letting some of that go and saying, all right, you're the best drum set player I know. I'm gonna offer what I can, and you offer what you can, and that was a real kind of personal achievement to be able to sit with somebody that I respect so immensely and play some music.
Interesting.
Like, remember when you came over and we played in the basement?
Yeah, I was going to say,
I was like freaking out.
Oh, really? See,
feeling bad.
I came out of it just the opposite. I was like, we sort of like played a drone for an hour, and I loved it. But maybe I'm the only person on the face of the earth that loves it. I think that there actually sometimes in those kind of scenarios, there's a real difficulty in communicating the idea of, hey, that was fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Why is that?
That's right. I don't know, man. I mean, I loved playing that night. I just felt like every time I put my hands on the keys, I thought, he's going to think that's pretty facile. And I'm glad that you didn't. We should totally do that again.
Yeah, right. Well,
I have a better basement now. So.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, though, to me, because you have a doctorate in music from Princeton. You have worked with a phenomenal number of ensembles and stuff like that. If there's anybody who doesn't really have the right to feel the imposter syndrome, it's sort of you.
Well, that's the thing about imposter syndrome, right? It's not rational. It's the same as anxiety. It's the same as all the things we all suffer from, right? They're not, part of it's true and part of it is completely sort of a perceptual misfire. Working with ensembles as a composer, sort of like being in the basement as a one-man band, right? I mean, you have time to craft these things, and you have, in some cases, a syntax that you can hide behind, which is what I was doing for a long time.
Oh, really?
Right? Saying, this is going to be gnarly, thorny music that does a lot of complex stuff, so I'm not on the line. No, I should say that not everybody who makes complex music is doing what I was doing. I'm just saying I was using complexity as a shield.
Sure.
If you hear my music in the last couple of years, it's just a whole different game. And that's personal growth and change, I think.
That's really interesting. Now, you have listened to my podcast, so you will know a big part of my podcast is kind of doing taking the opportunity to learn where people came from and what their backgrounds were. And I know some of it for having gotten to know you, but I'm actually curious, kind of going back further than I would know. As you were growing up, what drew you into music? You were a percussionist, so what drew you into that particular instrumentation? But how also, quite frankly, to me, it's becoming more of a thing now, But for a long time, there was not really an avenue for percussionists to become composition people in academia.
Yeah.
There was sort of like a bridge there that couldn't be gapped, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you probably didn't see a lot of people that were models for you. What allowed you to take that trek? What was your path to get to be where you are today?
Well, that's really interesting. And I think a lot of what you're saying is resonant with my experience, but in a sort of surprising way. I mean, I completely agree that there's an idea about certain kinds of instruments and their appropriateness for subsequently becoming a composer, right? And I felt that very acutely in my undergraduate career, where I was the jazz ensemble drummer, and really struggling in sort of the more formal classical tradition, and felt like I had to remake myself as a pianist or something, or as a conductor, or whatever it was, and really tried hard to do that, to play a very different game. So I don't think that I solved the problem. I think if anything, I perpetuated the myth in the way that I was going about establishing myself as a composer, even in my own mind, let alone in the world. But taking an even longer view. In my house, there was a ton of music. My dad's a concert pianist. He's a fantastic pianist. And I did not have an affinity for the keyboard the way that he did. So that was really kind of a struggle for me growing up. I always felt like there were things I could do, but I wasn't a real musician, which I think now this is just like the worst way to think about what was happening. But for me, I thought, wow, I really have a knack for the drum set, and I love practicing the drum set, and I just would do that endlessly. But then you try to do things like voice a chord or sing a melody, and you realize that there are other elements of music that are different than what you're doing when you're coordinating between your limbs on the drum set, or creating color or texture or line in that way. So I'm playing the drum set a ton. I wind up playing the drum set in a pit band for South Pacific, for the Brewster High School performance of South Pacific. And I thought, wow, it'd be really cool to be up on stage. So then I auditioned for the musical the next year and got a really good part in Guys and Dolls, and so started to sing. My dad took the vocal music for Guys and Dolls and reverse engineered all the piano parts and played every single night while I sang. He sort of taught me to sing. He's also a choral director at a middle school in New York City. So now I'm like playing drums, I'm singing, I'm sort of learning the piano little by little, and I get to college and realize that, oh no, the classical tradition is not about you playing the drum set and singing "Luck Be a Lady." This is a different thing, right? And I'm just like, oh my God, what am I going to do to get to where I need to be? At least, my perception of where I needed to be. The answer was technology in a way. Uh-huh. So we're doing things where we're writing piano pieces that the disc clavier is going to play, right? And I thought, well, if the disc clavier is going to play it, sky's the limit, right? So I started making this really wild piano music, sort of fantasy piano music, what I'd love to be able to do if my hands would just work that way. And so from the very beginning, technology was this way of me extending my imagination, and more than that, extending the physical capabilities of what I could do. Then that's when I really sort of got off to the races. But still, I was kind of hung up about what music ought to be, right? I ought to be able to play orchestra pieces at the piano. There are these like unbelievable skills that kind of traditional classical musicians, art music practitioners have that I just didn't have, that I don't have, and that I'll never have, and it's been a process of letting that stuff go. Really just saying, all right, here's what I can offer and what I can do. And luckily, a place like Carleton or, the contemporary art music landscape, there's a place for me in it. And I am just so grateful for that. Because if I had done this, 100 years ago, there's no way. There's just no way.
I think even 20 years ago almost, it's interesting. Now, you came up through the Princeton system, which I think actually was like one of the places where the mold was broken.
Yeah.
And sort of the ability to explore the artistry of music beside the tradition of music was really, it was amplified, and it was brought to the fore, I think, right? Particularly Dan Truman's efforts,
Yeah, Dan Truman, if you're listening, thank you for all the things, man. I mean, I cannot overstate the case that without Dan's influence and without his teaching and friendship, like, I would be living a very different life right now.
Yeah,
you know?
right. I hear that.
Sometimes there's a person who just goes like boop and grabs you and does what you need them to do at that time. And I was just immensely grateful for Dan. I used to joke that I owed him my firstborn, but he's never collected on that, which is good because I really like my first and born children and would not want to deliver
them. If it would have been colicky, it might have been all right. Huh?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he would have been a great dad too, but I'm glad it went the way it did. You know?
When you got into that program, where were you at, and what did it look like when he plucked you?
Yeah.
And when you changed, what was the change for you? Was it a change in confidence? Was there some change in just your ability to imagine yourself doing something differently?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I'm trying to put myself back at that moment when I decided to apply to Princeton. And part of it was that I knew I could take my performance practice and put it forward as something legitimate, right? I knew that I could say, I get your program. You're looking for people like me that don't really have an institutional home, that are doing something with rigor and imagination, but that doesn't fit a particular kind of mold. So where I was at in 2006 when I got in was, I'm going to take this one person performance practice thing and just turn it into the thing that I do. Didn't go that way because at Princeton, people saw through without even knowing it or articulating it. I think they realized or sensed that all this was coming from some kind of hang up, you know? And these teachers at Princeton, I think for the most part, they're feeling pretty good about where they are and pretty generous as listeners. And so when you come in with that kind of intensity and self-doubt, it doesn't really compute. And then you got to go back and figure out what's that about.
Sure.
Right. Working with Dan specifically, he really was encouraging of my work with language in a lot of different ways. I was writing a lot. For part of my time at Princeton, I was writing a book. I wasn't even writing music, which was incredible to have that kind of support. I'm like reading. I remember going to lessons with Dan or Dimitri and sitting there in their offices reading them these recipes that I was writing, these sort of like narrative food memory things, which I turned into these sound pieces, you know, or playing the initial drafts of my dissertation composition, which was me reading a story and chopping up the words and then recombining them with controller keyboards to sort of like put the sentences back together. And Paul just being so encouraging. And this is Paul Lansky. This is the guy that months before I went to Princeton, I would have anxiety attacks about him looking at me using a sort of like stupid digital recorder as an unsophisticated tool. Like I'm imagining all these things that Paul will say to me to find me out as somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing. And instead he is this sort of unbelievable patron of the work that I'm doing, you know, and it turned me around. It was like, I guess this is valuable in some way, you know, like shockingly enough, this is valuable. So getting in made me feel that way, but more than getting in, actually arriving there and realizing that the conversation you think you're having is not the conversation that anybody else is having with you. You know, I mean, it was really something, you know, and not just artistically, personally, confidence-wise, what it is to be a human on this planet who wants to share something. I learned a lot about that from my mentors there.
So my question to you, given kind of the anxiety that you express and given sort of the practice that you had not fitting within typical roles, I'm actually really surprised that you stuck with sort of a traditional music trajectory as well. I mean, frankly, and I count myself among this, a lot of times when people run into that thing of like, my music doesn't fit the musical world, they're like, well, I'll become an art student and I will do abstract art and sound pieces with art, and I can be in an art band and I can do an art practice, and I don't have to buy into the classical tradition, but I also don't have to put up with the beating that they hand out occasionally too, right?
Yeah.
Why did you choose to take the hard path?
Interesting. You know, I don't think I did. I think I did what you just described. When I applied to Princeton, if you look at my essay, I say that I'm a performance artist, right? I sent them a book that I made with my hands with all this artwork. And some of the artwork was stuff I'd made. Like I put wet ink on CDs and put it in a spinner and make art out of it. That was also the album. I mean, it was off the wall, you know? So I think I did do what you're suggesting. I think I did apply to art school. It's just that I thought the Princeton music program would take me.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
And so I think it sort of like somehow through some miracle, I wound up, it's like I never left the path. It's like I sort of picked, you know, but it wasn't intentional. Like in my mind, I had bailed, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really?
After Michigan, I bailed. Yeah. I was like, I'm going to make music in my apartment. I'm going to wait tables. I'm going to start a painting company. I mean, I had all these ways that I thought I'd be able to survive. Princeton was this loophole, you know, it was like this way back in. Wow. And it somehow happened. And then I met wonderful collaborators there. I started working with Soul Percussion while I was at Princeton.
Right.
And those guys are just the greatest and have been, you know, really, really over the years, super encouraging and really have championed my music over the years. And then I thought, well, if these guys are classical musicians, maybe I can do that too, right? Like this seems to check out. I like working with these people.
So how did you first meet them?
At Princeton, there's a composers, used to be called Composers Ensemble, now it's called Sound Kitchen, but it's a sort of concert series where we can bring in outside ensembles who will be paid to work on our stuff. And every year you get together with your colleagues and decide who you want to invite. I had seen So play my first year, I think, and I saw that, and it was incredible. I remember Seth Cluett, he did a piece with So, and there were like air cans, and like it was just this very textural sort of almost like musique concrète, but for humans, you know? Mm-hmm. And I was really struck by it, and I said, we got to bring this group in. So we brought them in the next year, and I started writing a piece for them, 4 drum sets called Octobot, which I wrote on an airplane on my way to Las Vegas, or started it on an airplane on my way to Las Vegas. That's another story. And it was sort of like, welcome back to concert music. Here's the greatest ensemble you could imagine.
Yeah, right.
Just delivering on this drum set piece. And I hadn't written a notated piece in 8 years or something.
Okay.
No, maybe less than that, like 5 years or something. So that was pretty extraordinary.
Because I would say that was the thing that really, like, when I started doing some research on you, it's clear that your interactions with the So Ensemble was sort of like, that was a real big step forward for you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I was terrified to give them that piece, you know. Yeah. I remember taking the train to their studio. I missed the train, first of all. I wound up getting there because I'm compulsively early, so even missing the train, I got there. And I heard them read through this piece and was really just in awe of what they were able to do, and also quite smug about what I made.
What you pulled together, right?
Yeah.
As I've interacted with you and the different kind of music you do, you seem to just sort of like embrace it all. So you have this solo performance kind of thing that you do. You have this work where you're doing sort of like classical percussion ensemble works. I caught you one night in a rock band, burning it up at the Imminent Brewery.
Oh yeah,
which we've done our little hideaways in the basement. Yeah, you're doing house concerts and stuff. How do you incorporate all those things into sort of like one artistic vision? I mean, one of the things I notice is when I talk to people who have a variety of things, that sometimes they have like one through line, and then each of these are like little branches. And in other cases, they have like different practices completely. How do you approach it? Because your work as a rock band is going to be really different than what you're going to do with an ensemble here at Carleton, for example. Yeah. Probably.
No, I think that's true. I mean, playing drums in Tower Sudan is different than writing a piece for, chamber quintet or something. Those are different things. And I guess I think the if we imagine all these things as like little circles, right? Then there's some kind of thing in the middle of that Venn diagram, and it holds it all together. And I guess that thing is just like my human body or something. I don't. Yeah, there are through lines. There's like thinking about physiology, right? How your body makes music. I'm really interested in that. I think my concert music is evidence of my interest in that. I think my own practices are evidence of that. But then there's stuff that doesn't line up under that rubric either. So Yeah. Is there a through line that unites all this stuff? I think there are probably multiple priorities to do with physiology and language and rhythm and all this kind of stuff. But really what unites it all is my curiosity and interest in all this kind of stuff. I love learning things. I think I'm much more interested in displaying curiosity than in displaying mastery, if that makes sense. I love getting in the weeds on all kinds of different stuff. And I guess if I were thinking about the way to really maximize my earning potential, I would kind of go all the way on one of these directions, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in like being an apprentice all the time and in multiple instances and rooms and cultures, and so getting into a lot of different things that are sort of at the same table but not the same conversation. That's
Sure.
a really good way to keep yourself an apprentice.
Yeah. When did you first start interacting with music technology?
In high school, my dad had a Roland JV30 and a Brother floppy disk sequencer.
Yeah.
And I remember trying to make, arrangements of tunes on that thing. When I got to college, the first music theory assignment we had was to orchestrate a Chopin prelude for the instruments in the room.
Okay.
And I was like, well, I'll just mock it up on this weird floppy disk sequencer.
Yeah.
Right. So I record the B minor prelude for all these different instruments, and, it's sunk in the room with the humans, but boy, did I love that thing I made on the sequencer.
Right.
So that was the first time. And then that quickly moved to really like notation programs. And I thought I was writing music that was sort of like possible but hard, but really I was writing impossible music that was, mediated by technology, right? So
sure.
that's really when it got going. I didn't really think of myself as a sort of, I didn't think of that as relevant musical activity though. It was like weird gadgets. I didn't think of it as something I could really do until I got to graduate school at Michigan. So then I studied with Evan Chambers and some electronic music courses, and that's when it really kind of opened up for me.
Okay.
I started buying gear, started making albums in my room, my apartment. And then at Princeton, really kind of got going more. But that was really hard because I had never been under the hood before. I'd never written a line of code until I got to Princeton. And then I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing,
Right. Well, because that's really baked into the process.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the things you imagine are different. When you really understand the tools that you're using, it affects your imagination, not just your process, right?
Sure.
And so I was still trying to do old things in new ways. Now I'm starting to do things that are sort of suitable for the tools. That's really exciting. It makes me want to learn the tools better too.
Yeah, right. Now, one of the things I'm curious about because of the time frame, I would say that there was a period where, and you would have kind of like skirted around kind of through the middle of it maybe. There was a period where music technology and the ability, the way you described it was like you thought you were doing hard music using technology, but you were doing impossible music, right?
Yeah.
There was a certain extent to which that was the ability to do that kind of just like allowed you to blow through academia, right? Because it wasn't the person who was doing string quartets the old way wasn't do that. You could come in with something that looked like, an explosion of fly crap on a page, and you could have a system that could perform it, and everybody would be like, ah,
Yep. Yep.
At what point for you did it change to where instead of just being like a cool way to do do stuff that other people couldn't do?
Yeah, right.
So because you had technology under your fingers and you were kind of comfortable with it, you could do stuff that other people weren't able to pull off.
Right.
That has its own sort of like juice to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But at some point, you clearly made a switch to where it was like, oh, no, these tools are my subjects maybe, or these tools are my assistants, but there's a deeper thing that I'm rocking here,
Yeah.
What do you remember any point at which your relationship with the tools changed?
Well, I think on some level I'm still doing the thing I was doing when I was 18 and punching above my weight, There are ways that I'm still doing that because I can make processes happen in an acoustic piece of music and kind of multiple registers using notation software and other kinds of tools that I'd be hard pressed to find a different way to do it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
True, right.
But it's true that at some point you start to realize through being in enough rooms enough times what you're actually doing versus the technology being a thing you can use to project a possibility.
Right.
Then it winds up becoming, for me now, a thing where I sort of like, there is a sort of nebulous sense, however nebulous, of what I'm trying to do that the technology is facilitating versus I have no idea what's happening right now. And it feels good. I'm going to do it anyway. Now, there's still some of that, all the time. That's what I think the beauty of it is. Like when I made the vocal processor, the beat sprayer or whatever, I was just like, I don't know. I don't know what the range of numbers is supposed to be. Well, let's try a few things. That's cool. It's working. Yeah. So still doing that in a way. There was a moment, honestly, teaching really got it under control in a way that it hadn't been before. Getting here in 2015 and saying, all right, I'm teaching a music technology course and I've been using music technology for a long, long time, but how would I want to have learned it? How would I want somebody to have spoken about it with me? Sure. Getting that together was a game-changing experience for me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask too, how, in comparison to, at least my experiences, in comparison to what music technology I saw, at different stages. I mean, kids coming out of high school now with 6 years of beat making with Ableton under their belt or whatever. I mean, they have some phenomenal skills. How much do you have to, or how much do you feel like you're constantly changing just what that first breaker bar is of this is what I can expect kids to know now, or this is what they do know, or this is where, this is the level at which they're already clocking me,
This is the thing about curiosity versus mastery.
Yeah, I get that.
If I thought I was this sort of consolidated set of, exactly. If I was this consolidated set of ideas and principles and whatever, and then the kids were coming in with paradigm shifting things that I had to adjust to all the time, that'd be one thing. I'm learning from them all the time, kind of by design, not as a sort of unfortunate byproduct of knowledge changing, but rather as a person who's very much in the stream of what do I need to know? I'm learning from them as much as they're learning from me. And I think it's an incredible privilege to be in that kind of situation. And it's incredibly privileged also.
But that also kind of puts a bit of a stressor on being an instructor too, right?
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, first of all, you're gonna have a variety of skills that are gonna be walking in the room. But secondly, you're gonna also find yourself in a position of saying, I need to help this person get further. While you may feel like you're in constant learner mode, some of these people may think that they're already masters or experts. And you have to help them become better or become more complete or push themselves in some way. What kind of new stresses do you find?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think for me, what I'm trying to do is design a high ceiling. I'm trying to design a thing that if you go into that place where you're so unbelievably curious and the things that you're doing are reinforcing the things that you're thinking, and you wind up in this kind of unbelievable feedback loop, where you're in the weeds, I'm trying to design projects and processes that will send people into that mode based on all that they know. I also think that being a really generous, careful listener is always helpful, even if you know way more than me about the under the hood technique, So that's the first time I taught the computer music course here. I mean, I was outclassed by everybody in the room, I would say, just line for line, programming ability. But there's still something that I can really offer. I can listen with the ears of somebody who's had a lot of at-bats as a listener and as a maker, and really offer something, And
that's a great point.
Yeah. Now it's certainly I've gotten more comfortable since then. I've learned so much as a result of going through those processes. But still, I'm trying to hear what you're doing. You seem to be enthusiastic about X. Here's what I hear. It's a powerful thing to be able to do. If you don't get hung up on displaying your chops, then you can actually offer a lot just as a human with ears, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Not to be too reductive, but for people who come in with a fair amount of skills, what's the place that you often see as a blind spot?
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean, my experience was quantization.
Huh.
Everything being
Yeah.
like block quantized, so everything sounded like a stack of shoe boxes or something.
Yeah.
That was the thing I noticed. That was something that few people could break out of on their own.
Right. It doesn't occur to you to think about that. Right. Yeah. For me, lately, it's been a timbre. It's been like sonic shaping. I feel like, and in some practices, this is the only thing people are doing, so it's like really exciting, right? But by and large, when I get a student who's been doing a lot of like sequencing or beat making or whatever, I always feel like, could we really forge that sound a bit more? Could we make it really special?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because it's not something I think I'm particularly great at. I just insist on figuring out how to make a sonic signature no matter what I'm doing, whether that signature now is like, how do I put it? You think about orchestration in classical music or something, right? I mean, there are master orchestrators out there. And I try to imagine that electronic music has that same priority. And I think they also feed into each other really well. Evan said this in Michigan. He was like, for somebody who doesn't know why they're in this electronic music requirement, think about how understanding acoustics is going to change the way you write orchestra music, for example.
Right.
And so that kind of thinking lately has been really, really interesting to me. And that's where I feel like I have something to offer.
That's really interesting. So now in kind of a completely different track, I walked in here with my copy of One More Revolution. You mentioned before in some of the things you're doing, that writing was a part of what you also explored as well.
I'm looking at my shelf to see if I have a copy, but I don't. All right, go on.
So
You've got the only one in the room.
One in the room. Awesome.
Amazing.
But it's a book sort of reminiscence, short reminiscence about music and about the people that you've interacted with music and the physical stuff of music.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, but again, to be honest, you talk about having a lot of anxiety over things, and you're the person who puts crap out there more than anyone. I mean, these are some really personal stories in some cases.
Well, the oversharing thing is interesting.
Well, I don't know if it's oversharing if you're actually like putting it in book form. Oversharing normally is like over beers.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
That's when oversharing happens. Right. But I think that it's quite remarkable that yet again, we talk about like a variety of expressions that you use.
Yeah.
I mean, the written word is something that a lot of people who are musicians don't tread on. Yeah. What made writing an important thing for you to approach? How does that how is that part of your overall voice? And also, how does that sort of like, cleanse your palate or keep the tunnels clear for you in some way?
That's a good way to put it, keeping the tunnels clear. Sure. Well, I've loved to write forever. It was the thing that I felt most comfortable with, even while I was playing drums for hours and hours every day in high school or whatever. I felt like when I need to get something done, I'll just rack and write it. I feel like that felt good to me. It felt like a native form or something, if that makes sense, a kind of home base. And it's always felt that way. But I never felt like I could make up a good story, for example. The idea of writing a novel is just completely baffling to me.
Okay, sure.
It's like, so let me get this straight. I make up a person and they do a bunch of things with other made up people. Like, I have no idea how I would
pages.
How in the world do I do that? That sounds wild. But I was always able to write about my own experience, And so, the book, maybe I'll go backwards. The book started as my dissertation, which was very much about physical media and how we relate to physical media, vinyl, versus how we relate to digital media, like versus what is it when it's invisible? Like how are those things different? And it was very sort of like research driven and analytical and whatever. And so the book is actually me removing all of the other material from my dissertation and writing through it in a voice that felt like the vignettes that began each section in the original text. I'd write a little vignette and then I write a bunch of analysis, right?
Got it.
But I was like, well, what if I made kind of the same arguments here in a way, but they were all in that voice that I just loved the texture of and the practice of creating. So that's what that is. That's my dissertation rewritten as a memoir.
Interesting.
Yeah. It is linked, though, to the sort of anxiety and other, mental health type challenges that I've alluded to here. I discovered a book called The Artist's Way. Mm-hmm. And one of the core practices in that book is writing 750 words every morning. And I've done that whole hog for a long time.
Really?
Yeah. So I now do it through an online system, and I'm at 1.8 million or something right now. Yeah, I just write and write and write. Wow. Another thing that helped me a lot was working in the Princeton writing program. And the amount of feedback we had to give was so unbelievably voluminous that I got really good at I just got really good at generating stuff. Uh-huh. And so that was kind of this perfect set of circumstances to make one productive with respect to the written word, but also really real about it. If it's being used as a kind of therapy and it's being used in this almost like it doesn't have to be beautiful way, let's just get the students their feedback. If you combine those two things, you get to a pretty interesting place in terms of your relationship to the written word. And that's kind of where I am these days. I mean, I write a ton. When you hear these tunes next week, they are the most, text-heavy songs you'll ever hear. Yeah, it's like I have song structures, but the words are just like morphing all the time. Like this is the music of the chorus, but the words are completely different than the last. And there's so much language in these songs. It feels really good.
Well, that's cool but that's also interesting because what it sounds like then is that you're kind of using some of the forms of like songwriting, but you're also subverting them by like not following the rules of choruses or just a revision of the last time I sang the chorus.
When I played so there's a set of songs that I put together for this album, and then there's some new ones I'm going to be playing next week too, very new ones. When I played the album set at the So Percussion Summer Institute at my composer talk with Jason, I performed all these songs. One of the students was like, so your songs are just like a bunch of vamps, right? And I thought, yeah, they are. It's a bunch of vamps, and I'm just like over the top of these vamps, right? And that's been kind of an interesting way for me to think about it. My uncle, who's a wonderful playwright and just this artistic soul, he's like, I was wondering when you'd start leading with your words when I played some songs from him this summer, and now, I guess, is the answer.
Wow, that's really amazing. What a great tale to story. So, our time is up.
Great.
But for people who want to hear more of your work, or maybe read some of your work, or engage with some of your stuff, what's the best way for them to find your work?
Yeah, on my website, andreamazzariello.com. I should probably spell it out or something.
Oh, no, I'll actually put it on the show notes. That'll work out.
Yeah, just go to my website. I've got writing there. I've got links to all kinds of stuff, scores, places where you can listen. Yeah, it's all over the place. Yeah.
And this release that you're putting out, what label is that on?
So it's on my own label. It's called One More Revolution Records, onemorerevolution.com.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, fantastic. Well, I hope that people will take the opportunity to drop in and listen to your stuff. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Let me come up here. By the way, I'm in this music professor's office, and I'm looking at a dangerous music mixed down monitoring system, 2 racks of Eurorack stuff, a Moog one.
It's problem abundance up here.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Darn, this is a total pleasure. Thank you for coming in. It's really exciting. Like I said, the only place to go from here is fresh air.
Well, there you go. I'll talk to my sister Terry, and we'll see what we can do. All right. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Andrea for having the chat. It was really great to hang out with him. Unfortunately, with the current situation with the coronavirus, it might be my last in-person interview with anybody for quite a while. I guess the social distancing of Skype is probably going to be in everyone's best interest. I want to thank everybody who has been so supportive over on Patreon. That's been really helpful. If you are interested in checking out some additional information, this week we have a nice excerpt from Andrea and from one of his books, as well as my reminiscence of working with him and of putting this podcast together. I want to thank you, though, just for listening and for being there every week for me. It's really encouraging to see the number of people that listen to this, and I hope that it just continues, and I hope that we continue working together to make this great podcast continue to happen. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop me a line, darwin.gross@gmail.com, ddg@cycling74.com, or ddg@20objects.com. Thanks a lot, and we'll catch you next time around. Bye.